Greenland's not exactly a desirable place for, for holidays. This is not, Hitler taking Paris so he could have nice paintings and museums. I mean, this is a critical part of the world for North America, for Europe.
I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. Those are the words of the US President Donald Trump in a text to the Norwegian Prime Minister. He was responding to a message from the leaders of Norway and Finland opposing his decision to impose tariffs on European allies over their refusal to let the US take control of Greenland. The message appears to show his decision over Greenland is linked to the fact that he wasn't awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Here's Prime Minister Keir Starmer speaking at a press conference earlier.
Any decision about the future status of Greenland belongs to the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark alone. That right is fundamental, and we support it.
Well, that was Keir Starmer speaking this morning. Let's try to understand more about what the president is up to. And joining me now is Greg Swenson, chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Greg, good morning.
Good morning, Hugo.
Thanks for being with us, Greg. That text to the Norwegian PM then, it says, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. That makes it look like the tariff threat is some sort of revenge. Is that how we should see it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The president's always provocative when he starts these things. And that's just his nature. That's his style. Go out of the gates, throw a grenade in the room, be provocative. Everybody freaks out sometimes for good reason. And then things settle down, whether it's a day or a week or a month later. And so I think the outcome of this is what's important to the president. So, he doesn't necessarily need to buy Greenland. He might. Or the United States might. I'm not sure we can afford it, but there's an outcome here that I think will include some sort of defense and security agreement, some sort of critical minerals development, maybe some oil and gas, some kind of control of the shipping lanes, all of which is good for Europe, good for NATO, good for Denmark, and good for the U.S. That's for sure.
I mean, people are, Greg, extremely upset by this. Over the weekend, I heard people discussing the Greenland talk and as a sort of echo of the appeasement of the 1930s, even at the point at which a bullying expansionist power needs to be confronted. Is this really the country that America wants to be right now?
No, it's not expansionist in the sense, anything like the German expansion. It's just apples. It's not apples and apples. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, the defense and security of Greenland is important, as I mentioned, to the defense and security of Europe and of the United States. So, we're not in it. I mean, Greenland's not exactly a desirable place for, for holidays. This is not, Hitler taking Paris so he could have nice paintings and museums. I mean, this is a critical part of the world for North America, for Europe. I mean, it sits between the right in the middle of the NATO countries, the Atlantic. And so, but given its position in the Arctic, we control one end of the Arctic, the critical Arctic lanes, which is in Alaska. And now we need to control the other one. Yes, we have a base there, but I think we need to have more bases without asking permission from Greenland and Denmark specifically. But I think there's a lot more to it. I think critical minerals obviously are important. We're buying, the United States, the Pentagon, the Department of War right now is completely dependent on China for critical minerals, specifically rare earth metals. And so, that's not sustainable. So there's a long list of reasons why ultimately we have to have more control of Greenland, not necessarily owning it, although that's one possible outcome. But, and we've had a history of big land purchases, the Louisiana Purchase, the state of Florida, the state of Alaska, all bought and negotiated. And the U.S. has been trying to buy Greenland for quite some time, starting with Harry Truman in 1948. So, look, I think there's a lot of drama right now, and that's a lot of provocation by President Trump. That's his nature. So, but I think things will settle down, and I think the outcome is what's important.
But I mean, America already has a deal with Denmark that allows it to put basically as many troops on Denmark as it wants. There were 10,000 troops on Denmark during the Cold War. There's now at best a few hundred. Many more could be there under existing agreements. Also, if America desperately wants Greenland's rare earths and rare minerals, I'm sure they could do a deal with the Danes over them. A lot of people think that this is really about Donald Trump wanting to legacy build. He absolutely is expansionist. He does want to increase the American map on his watch, so he's remembered for having do so. That does sound like it's sort of expansionist in a really traditional, kind of almost colonialist type way, doesn't it?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think, there's no doubt the president, like any president, wants to have some sort of legacy. If, buying Greenland or expanding the territory of the United States is part of it, sure, that's fine. But I think what's important here is again, it's the defense of not just the United States, but of Europe and our NATO allies. And yeah, we can expand, but we have to do it with permission of Denmark and Greenland, and that could change over time. Right now, I think they would say yes, but they put a ban on uranium development. They've ceased new leases of oil and gas development. So, these are things that are important to the security of NATO and Europe and the U.S. And I don't think the U.S. wants to be dependent on decision making from Copenhagen or from Greenland. And so, it doesn't mean we have to take over Greenland, and it's a little dramatic, but I do think that more control and the original arrangement with Greenland did allow for the U.S. to expand their bases on the island, but since then, I think it was 1974 where they changed it and made it a little bit more of a process. And that's not something that is perfect in terms of. And we've been defending Greenland for 80 years now, and so for free. And so we'd probably like to get some benefit, some economic benefit. But again, the economic benefit is really more of a defense and security benefit, which is the rare earth minerals and other critical minerals, as well as having more bases there.
Greg, what do your fellow Republicans think about all this? Because the Republican Party particularly has got a strong Atlanticist tradition under Reagan and plenty of other presidents going back a long, long time. This was a party that was proud of its international allies, proud of its role as the leaders of the free world. When you see those kind of those alliances really sort of straining to the point of fracture right now, you're here in the UK, you're well aware of the ill feeling this generates among American allies. What do other Republicans think of this? There must be some wariness there.
I think so, especially if the traditional country club Republican that didn't really think about the long term. I mean, everything was going well. You had this great the NATO alliance that was essentially the United States. But we have $38 trillion in debt. So I think the post-war alliances were really important when Europe was beaten up and broke, and it was up to the United States to defend Europe. And we did that for 70 years and won the Cold War with great assistance from the United Kingdom, by the way. And I think, that alliance between, Mrs. Thatcher and Reagan was a fantastic one. But that was 35 trillion in debt ago. And so we just can't, continue to sustain it. And President Trump, in many ways, has improved NATO. NATO is important to him. It's probably the one multilateral organization that he likes. And he wants Europe to be able to defend themselves and not be 100% dependent on the U.S., which they still are. So look, I think the times are just times change, and I think that the alliance the way it was is unsustainable because the U.S. has too much debt, and the Europeans have really they've in many ways their ability to defend themselves has disintegrated over time, and so that really needs to change. So I think the alliance, while seemed to be working well in the 80s with complete dependence on the United States, I don't think that's sustainable given the debt trajectory of the U.S. deficit right now.
Do you think the alliance will survive if
Oh, yeah,
America does?
definitely.
Even if America takes Greenland, do you think the alliance will survive?
Well, it depends how we take it. I don't think we're doing, there won't be any invasion anytime soon. So, yeah, it will definitely survive and will be better because for two reasons. One is, the other NATO countries are committing at least, they haven't spent 5% yet, but, committed to 5% of GDP in defense spending. That's good. And then, of course, if the U.S. is controlling, in many respects, controlling Greenland with both the minerals development and more importantly, the defense and technical development, NATO will be safer. Europe will be safer. And so, in one base on Greenland is probably not going to cut it for the next generation or two. So, I think it's all good. I mean, there's a couple of speed bumps right now, that's for sure. But I think ultimately, with more control of Greenland, the alliance will be better and stronger.
Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas, thank you very much indeed.